We begin this morning with the growing backlash against Donald Trump's nearly $1.8 billion so-called anti-weaponization fund. That is the fund that Vice President J.D. Vance and Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche could not unequivocally say would not be used to give taxpayer dollars to convicted January 6 rioters, including those who violently attacked law enforcement officers. It is being described as, quote, utterly stupid, morally wrong, unexplainable, a galactic blunder, and stupid on stilts. But what is different in the outrage against Trump's latest abuse of the presidency is that all of those comments came from lawmakers in Trump's own party. It's something we've rarely seen during this administration, but apparently this is a line that is becoming too far for even Republicans to cross. Blanche failed to win over Senate Republicans in a closed-door meeting on Thursday. Yesterday, Senator Ted Cruz described it as, quote, one of the roughest meetings I've seen in my entire time in the Senate. Fiery does not begin to cut it, Cruz said. My guess is there are probably 45 senators in the room. At least half of them were blasting the attorney general, and they were pissed. Coming from Ted Cruz, that's saying a lot. There were multiple senators yelling at the attorney general, saying this feels like self-dealing. And it's not just Senate Republicans pushing back. We are also seeing some signs of resistance from their colleagues in the House. There's now a bipartisan bill to block this fund, co-authored by Republican Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. Whether it'll ever be brought to the floor for a vote is yet to be seen. In response to the backlash, Trump posted yesterday, quote, I gave up a lot of money in allowing the just announced anti-weaponization fund to go forward. I could have settled my case, including the illegal release of my tax returns and the equally illegal break-in of Mar-a-Lago for an absolute fortune. Instead, I am helping others who were so badly abused by an evil, corrupt, and weaponized Biden administration receive at long last justice, President DJT. And I was quoting there. Joining us now, Alan Vitale, host of Way Too Early, MS Now senior congressional reporter and my office mate, and Jeff Mason, White House correspondent for Bloomberg.
Whose office mate am I?
We'll all take you.
We have a
Come on over, Jeff.
Very small couch that I already said no to.
All right, Allie.
Farm it out.
I found it very rich that Senator Cruz was saying that meeting with the acting attorney general was the roughest meeting he has been in his entire time in the Senate. And he's like one of the most disliked people in the Senate. So I'm sure he has heard his fair share of rough language. But was it as rough as the senator describes?
Yes. And the fact that Ted Cruz would wait until his podcast to make that criticism, I think, is notable. But we did hear Republican senators immediately coming out of the room saying, at best, they had some questions for the acting attorney general, and at worst, that they were concerned about this fund, and that key appropriators like Senator Susan Collins said that they were not convinced about the need for it in the first place. And I think that it comes in tandem with the fact that we're now seeing pushback on the $1 billion for a ballroom that should have been in this reconciliation package. We're seeing Republican and Democratic pushback alike to the existence of this fund, whether or not they can do a bill that would restrict it or just make it not exist anymore. I think that is an open question. There's also court proceedings to that effect, too. But it all really begs the question on Capitol Hill, as they left town, by the way, not doing the reconciliation package that should have just been an easy targeted approach on immigration. Is this the moment that Republicans finally realize their political moment in the midterms diverges so aggressively from the president's, and are they ready to at least start not agreeing in lockstep? Right. Because this shouldn't be notable that they're saying, hey, this isn't money that we approved to go to rioters that endangered many of our lives on January 6, 2021. It's just notable in this era of Washington where they've completely capitulated to the White House.
By vanquishing his perceived enemies this week in these primaries, he's seemingly made others on Capitol Hill. Also, I think it's very interesting that the senators yelling at Todd Blanche, but take that same energy down to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to where the actual issue, the guy that you have beef with is actually Donald Trump. Mr. Mason.
Yes, sir.
I won't make you answer that question. I do want to throw up the
Question is why?
exactly the name of the folks who have already said they're planning to file for compensation for this fund. Enrique Tarrio, convicted seditionist and leader of the far-right Proud Boys, he seeks up to $5 million. Michael Cohen, who's been on this show a couple of times, convicted January 6 rioters. Brandon Fellow seeks $30 million. Yvonne St. Cyr, $10 million. Trennis Evans seeks more than $1 million. Michael Caputo, Sam Nunberg, these are folks who worked for Donald Trump. Roger Stone, folks know those names. How is the administration, especially with someone like Enrique Tarrio, how's this White House defending him possibly getting money from the American taxpayer?
Well, they're just largely defending the fund. And you saw the defense that President Trump put out in that Truth Social post. I mean, he had said at one point this week that he had nothing to do with the negotiations that led to that.
Do you believe that?
It's not my job to say what I believe. But I don't believe, but it's contradictory.
Yeah.
You can say that with just clear reporting from what he said. At one point he said he wasn't involved, and then he said, I could have gotten a lot more. That certainly indicates that he was involved and had a hand in either in the negotiations or at least was informed about it and was weighing in. So they are defending it writ large as something that is right and as something that he wants. And yet it's created all of these political risks for him.
Yeah.
Jeff, I want to stick with you for a second because just even being at the White House this week, it was sort of remarkable how much the conversation was not focused at all on any of the pushback from Republican senators, at least amongst the White House officials and the senior administration officials that I was in touch with, which I think sort of speaks to this idea that we always come back to, which is what Steve Bannon called when Steve Bannon made the comparison of the U.S. Congress to the Russian Duma, right? That at the end of the day, they might have an angry, ornery, closed-door meeting, but are they actually going to take up Brian Fitzpatrick's anti-weaponization bill? And, John Thune saying that this is water under the bridge. Is it actually water under the bridge? What are they going to come back next week and do? And I guess what are you hearing from your White House sources about sort of their current view of the legislative body at the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue?
I think that's a spot-on question, and I would use a similar answer to the one that I gave Eugene. If you look at history, if you look at precedents, how has this White House, how has this president dealt with Republicans on the Hill? Occasionally they'll get some griping, and then they'll move on, or they'll shut it down. So if Republicans, if Republicans decide we're so angry about this, we're ready to break with the president, we're ready to support this law, we're ready to create a legislative fix that says no, we're not giving a $1.8 billion to this group of people at a time when our constituents are upset about the cost of gasoline, the cost of housing, the cost of groceries, then they have a mechanism to do that. But history would show that's not the mechanism, or that's not the pathway they're going to choose.
And you know why? Because, past is prologue, Jeff. Let's play some top Republican lawmakers, what they had to say after the January 6th attack, and then it'll put into perfect perspective what Jeff was just talking about.
All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough. If you're a conservative, this is the most offensive concept in the world, that a single person could disenfranchise 155 million people.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it.
And so this is why, to the point of Jackie's question, it's like, why do we even believe that these folks, when they come back, are not just going to go lockstep behind the president? But, Allie, I want you to talk about something you actually talked about seconds before we went on air, and that was about this fund, this anti-weaponization fund. Because to my mind, it's like, where's this money coming from? He's just taking $1.8 billion and just pushing it somewhere. But you were telling us that money actually exists in a fund.
That's sort of my understanding. And it came to my attention because when you heard Brian Fitzpatrick in the immediate hours after this fund was announced start talking about, okay, well, we're trying to get our arms around it and figure out where the oversight mechanisms are and where the funding streams are, that made me realize, oh, this might not be a new request that they are making of Congress. They are just creating this out of the fiscal budget that they already have. And I think that's one of the key questions is for Congress, who appropriates the money to these departments, they are trying to figure out where the revenue stream actually is. And so I think that's one of the reasons that people had a lot of confusion about this is, okay, in the $33 billion budget that DOJ had for fiscal year 2026, it's not the one that they're talking about now. It's why Todd Blanche and others are up on Capitol Hill talking about the fiscal year budget for next year. But this is something that it sounds to me like they created of their own volition. And that is why Congress now is having to figure out, okay, how would we even begin to stem this? And is this something that we have to make a law proactively restricting because we cannot say in a different mechanism we're blocking the funding? Well, that's, I think, where the conversation right now on Capitol Hill is instructive.
Right. And as you were talking, I'm remembering maybe a year or so ago, weren't we talking about the fact that Congress would pass something and then the White House would put out a statement saying, I don't care what you guys pass and what it was for. We're going to do what we want.
That it was all sort of funny money, right? And I think that's where it comes into a conversation about the comparisons to a Russian Duma of sorts, right? Like this Congress, I think, in pretty fascinating fashion, has been willing to cede a lot of its authorities to this White House, whether it be on war powers, whether it be on appropriations and funding. And I think this is a moment where Congress could make it that the White House has to actually pay attention to them and take them seriously and not just steamroll over them. But the White House is not going to ask Congress to do that. They are perfectly comfortable with the way that things are and the way that their priorities have flowed. And so this is now a question, to double back to where I began, of is this a moment where lawmakers realize that their political fortunes are different than that of the White House? And is this a moment where they actually choose to exercise this at a time where Donald Trump, and I don't remember who brought this point up, but it's the right one, I think it was you, Eugene, that this is a week where not only did they see their colleague Bill Cassidy see the president be endorse and work against him and lose a primary, but also endorsing Ken Paxton in Texas over John Cornyn, who has been in leadership, who is leadership's current pick for who they think can best win that seat, who, frankly, conventional knowledge in Texas is that it makes it a much less close race if it's Cornyn on the ballot as opposed to Paxton. I mean, that is not divorced from the reality on Capitol Hill, where Republicans are now saying, okay, if you're not going to ride with us, we're going to finally voice some objection, and we'll see if it sticks. I think that you're right to play the mask that you paid, to have the face that you're having. Like, all of that is fair, because past can be prologue. But we are forced to question, is this a moment where it's different?
Also making headlines today, Donald Trump's nearly $1.8 billion so-called anti-weaponization fund. It was hit by two new lawsuits. The civil complaints filed in federal court in Virginia and Washington, D.C. argue the fund violates the Constitution and other federal laws. So the plaintiffs include a prominent government watchdog group and a former federal prosecutor who says he was fired last year over his work prosecuting cases against January 6 rioters. These lawsuits, though, come as several members of Congress have introduced legislation to block this fund, including the top Democrat in the House Judiciary Committee.
Go to Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, and it says that neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay a debt or obligation for the purpose of paying for insurrection or rebellion against the United States. So it's unconstitutional, and it's just constitutionally blasphemous and outrageous that we would be taking money from every citizen in the United States paying taxes to give to people who attacked our police officers and tried to overthrow an American presidential election.
Joining me now, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst Ankush Khardori. So, Ankush, I want to get your honest opinion here, right? Do these efforts to challenge the constitutionality of the fund really have a chance?
I think the challenges in the courts are going to face an uphill battle. As Raskin said, he has this argument about there being an insurrection triggering provision of the 14th Amendment. The problem is, among others, that, the question of whether January 6th was an insurrection, particularly as it related to Donald Trump, has been litigated somewhat, right? There was an effort to disqualify Trump from running for 2024 on the theory that he was barred from running. So that is not a theory that has been sort of unequivocally accepted by the courts. So I think these are, worthy efforts in the courts, but just given the nature of the relevant legal rules, I think they could face an uphill battle. The much more direct and unimpeachable mechanism, for lack of a better word, to shut this thing down is for Congress to pass a law, for the Senate Republicans to actually stand up and block this notorious historical grift and fraud on the American public.
Speaking of Republicans, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche facing the wrath of many GOP senators over its creation this week, according to multiple reports. Donald Trump's $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS was likely going to be dismissed by the judge. So why would Blanche even agree to the settlement in the first place?
Because Blanche is a partisan and his loyalties run to the president, Trump, who was his client. Blanche represented Trump in the criminal cases surrounding the 2020 election. That's why he got put in as deputy attorney general, and that's why he's been elevated to the acting attorney general. It's not because he's an amazing lawyer or some, valuable component of the legal profession. The reason he's there is because he serves Donald Trump's interests very well. And I think it was a rather shameful display that we saw this week on the part of Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general, going to Congress, acting as if this was normal and justifying this fund. It is not. It's based on a pack of lies. He should know that. If he doesn't, he's unqualified. If he's lying just to, help Trump out on this and pretending this slush fund is a good idea, that makes him unfit too. So I hope the Senate Republicans, in addition to doing the right thing and shutting this fund down entirely, it should be $0 in this fund, consider whether they actually want to confirm Blanche to the permanent post. I mean, this is a guy who's really, I think, demonstrated that he has not actually got the ethical scruples that warrant being put in that position on a permanent basis.
And Kush, I want to talk about another major talking point of this fund that has a lot of people upset. The DOJ says anyone can apply. There's no partisan requirement here. Michael Cohen, in fact, Donald Trump's lawyer turned critic, says he is now getting his own application ready. Others who believe they were politically targeted are considering applying too.
I first thought it was a piece from The Onion because it can't be serious. It appears that they're serious. It's to compensate people who've been targeted by the Justice Department for, they say, personal, political, or ideological reasons. So I'm guessing I'll be in line. I hope I'll be ahead of those who savagely beat police officers and sacked the Capitol.
Are you going to apply?
Well, I'll talk to my lawyers, but it certainly sounds intended for someone like me.
Oh. So with Todd Blanche choosing the 5 members on the oversight panel and Donald Trump with the power to now dismiss any of those members as he wishes, is there any chance Comey or Cohen, for example, will succeed with their applications?
There is not. Now, one of the other things Todd Blanche has been doing recently is claiming that there's all this hidden evidence surrounding the Seashell indictment against James Comey, which there doesn't appear to be hidden evidence of his intent to actually threaten the life of the president. That case appears to be extremely weak, if not frivolous. So I would be frankly shocked if this administration agreed to pay James Comey. The president hates Michael Cohen, so I would be shocked if they do that. Now, it may be the case that if this fund gets set up, which it absolutely should not, that to save some face, they will give some funds out to some people who are on the left or Democrats or something. But this is not the purpose of this exercise. The purpose of this exercise is to extend a campaign of lies surrounding the 2020 election, a campaign of lies surrounding the people who tried to overturn that election and who deserve to be prosecuted for their participation in that effort, both in the planning and up to Trump, and also the people who sacked the Capitol that day. The notion that this is designed or may go to Democrats, it's a farce. I mean, this is not what this is for.
Ankush Khardori, thank you so much for your time and your input today.
It's time for a short farewell for America's embattled Director of National Intelligence. The position is a big job, overseeing and funding the 18 intelligence agencies scattered across the U.S. government and serving as the president's top intelligence advisor. But Director Gabbard made a critical misstep early in office when in March 2025 she testified to the Senate Intelligence Committee on Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program.
Trump did not like her appraisal, telling reporters this a few months later.
I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to having.
Trump bombed Iranian nuclear sites for the first time in June last year, and her return visit to the Senate Intelligence Committee this March went about as smoothly as her first.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
With that statement, Gabbard admitted her job had no real utility if the intelligence community's function was not to advise on imminent threats. It's a striking exit for Gabbard, who was a Democrat just 4 years ago. But in 2020, she left the party, calling it a, quote, elitist cabal of warmongers fueled by cowardly wokeness. Gabbard announced her resignation yesterday, citing her husband's cancer diagnosis. But tonight, the question isn't just why she's leaving. It's what it tells us about who actually had and has the president's ear. Back with us now is Andrew Weissman. So, Andrew, Tulsi Gabbard personally recommended revoking your security clearance, but you didn't even actually have one at the time that she decided to put you in with that group of people?
Well, to be fair, it was actually the President of the United States who issued an executive order directed at me and people who are far more exalted than I am. But she was the person who implemented it. I did not have a security clearance at the time. And so it was sort of irrelevant. She also, when she announced she was following the president's orders, she also misspelled my name. So in addition to being performative, somebody out there may have had their security clearance pulled, but it wasn't me. But I should say, in your intro, to me, the big lead up, and obviously if she's about to personally, with her husband, go through something terrible, and so this is really a discussion about performance.
Horrible, and God bless him and hope that he recovers speedily.
Exactly. And so you do have to respect her decision. And this is a discussion about sort of, you know, her actions while she was in office, is that having been in the intelligence community, the most important thing for the country and for the president should be to have an apolitical assessment of the intelligence. Now, what you do about that, what the decisions are, that is for the president. But the facts have to be presented in a completely neutral way. And that's what the president should want. I mean, I know the should is carrying a lot of weight there. And to me, that is the real issue with her tenure, is that you really saw that at her level, the intelligence was not getting to the White House in the way it should.
I think for me, the thing that I will always think about first when I think about her tenure as DNI will be that image of her in Fulton County. And just how unusual and disturbing it was, the entire scene. Do you agree with me that for me, that just felt like...
Absolutely. And I feel like that's such a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about, which is that the whole goal is to be apolitical and to be saying, my job is to present our best assessment of the facts so that you can make an ultimate call about what to do. Showing up at Fulton County, where that is, you know, at the time I thought, well, maybe there's some evidence related to the Director of National Intelligence because there's some foreign interference. And then it turns out when we see the affidavit, there's nothing of the kind. So speaking about performative acts, that was just irrelevant for her to be there, other than to sort of show I'm on your team, which is exactly what you don't want. I mean, the American public is entitled to, and frankly, the White House should want somebody who's going to say, I am just providing you is the best neutral assessment that I can.
Are you worried about who comes next?
Of course, absolutely. Because, you know, this, I think when you see her and you see, I mean, the litany of, you know, Todd Blanche that we've been talking about, and Kash Patel, and a whole series of people where I don't think the president is choosing, let's just say, the best person for the job.
Well, he promised us he was going to put only the best people in there. Andrew's new book, Liar's Kingdom, How to Stop Trump's
How do we stop
Deceit.
Trump's Yeah, I was going
Well, you got to buy the book to find out, Eamon.
Exactly.
That's why the book is selling so well, because everyone's desperate to get the answer to that
Everybody wants an answer.
Andrew Weissman, as always,
Andrew.
thank you so much. Great to see you.
I want to begin this hour with a simple question that many of you have been screaming at your TV screens for some time now. To whom does this democracy, whose 250th anniversary we are celebrating this year, to whom does this democracy actually belong? Same question raised earlier this month by the Hawaiian Republican State Representative Kanani Souza as she opened the floor debate on a bill that effectively bans corporate spending on elections in her state. If you haven't seen Souza's speech, you absolutely should look it up and watch it. Here's a clip.
Hawaii is not waiting for permission, not following the lead of others. We are leading. We are making history by restoring a fundamental truth. Power belongs to people, not corporations, especially political power. For too long, we have lived with a legal fiction that a corporation can stand shoulder to shoulder with a human being in the political arena, that it can spend without limit, influence without accountability, and project a voice so powerful that it overwhelms the very people our Constitution was written to protect. But here in Hawaii, we are not bound to accept that outcome as inevitable.
This is a very big deal. Hawaii just did something remarkable and genuinely historic. It passed a bill into law with near unanimous bipartisan support that effectively bans corporations from spending money to influence state elections. And it did this by redefining what powers a corporation actually has. Hawaii Governor Josh Green signed it on May 14th, making Hawaii the first state in the nation to take on Citizens United, and doing so in a way that no state has done before. This is good news because it's a model that at least a dozen other states are working on following. Now, obviously, you know the story of Citizens United, but it's worth repeating. In 2010, the United States Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that corporations, like people, have a constitutional right, a First Amendment right, to spend unlimited money in elections. Soon after that decision, the floodgates opened, as you would expect. From 2010 to 2024, outside groups spent more than $4 billion with a B on federal elections alone. Dark money, spending by groups that are not required to disclose their donors, hit a record $1.9 billion in the last presidential cycle. State Senator Carl Rhodes, the Hawaiian bill's lead author, noting the scale of the problem, said, quote, in 2006, dark money was less than $5 million nationwide. In 2024, there was over $1 billion with a B anonymously spent in the presidential election alone, end quote. For more than a decade since that infamous ruling, Americans were told that there was nothing to be done. You want to fix it? Good luck. Amend the Constitution. Good luck waiting for a different Supreme Court. But a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress named Tom Moore did not accept that. And what he came up with is frankly very clever. Moore's insight was this. Citizens United asked whether the government could regulate a corporation's right to spend money in elections. The court said no, it could not. But the Supreme Court was never asked, nor did it ask, a different, more fundamental question. Does a corporation have the power, not the right, the power to spend money on elections in the first place? And that question, it turns out, belongs entirely to the states. Here's the key to understanding this. Corporations are not born. They are, in fact, created by state law. Unlike humans who are actually born, corporations are created by state law. They are given their powers by state law. They are dependent on state law for their very existence, which is why people choose to incorporate in various different states based on the rights that that state offers. Anyone who even has a small company knows that a corporation in America is a state entity. Chief Justice John Marshall established this principle in 1819, writing that, quote, a corporation is an artificial being, invisible, intangible, and existing only in contemplation of law. Being the mere creature of law, it possesses only those properties which the charter of its creation confers upon it, end quote. Pretty simple writing. In other words, corporations only exist because states created them and gave them their powers, things like the right to own property, to sign contracts, to sue, and to be sued. That 200-year-old Supreme Court decision has never been superseded. So Tom Moore's strategy, he calls it the corporate power reset, builds directly on this concept. States create corporations. States grant corporations their power. States have always retained the authority to rewrite that list. And what the state grants, the state can take back. So instead of trying to restrict corporate speech, which is where Citizens United dwells and where states have lost repeatedly in federal court, Hawaii simply decided that it will decline to grant corporations that power in the first place. It is a subtle distinction, but it may be a legally and politically consequential one. It makes Citizens United irrelevant, at least within the borders of states that adopt this new way of thinking about it. Hawaii's new law, which takes effect on July 1st of next year, redefines corporations doing business in the state as entities that do not possess the power to spend money on elections or ballot measures. It does not eliminate super PACs, but it cuts off their most corrosive fuel source, anonymous corporate money. Super PACs can still operate, but only on money raised from human beings, whose names must be disclosed. State Senator Rhodes noted that anonymity isn't just a transparency problem, it's actually a national security problem. Quote, it's very difficult to know whether Russia or Iran or China are funneling money into American elections, end quote. That's true. And here's the important part. If a corporation in Hawaii violates the new law, the consequences are really serious. Loss of tax privileges, suspension of the right to sell products to the state government, potentially the loss of the right to do business in Hawaii altogether. The Hawaii Attorney General opposed the bill, by the way, warning that it would face immediate legal challenges, and she's probably right. Lawsuits are coming. But legal experts like Avian Soifer, the former dean of the University of Hawaii's law school, studied the measure closely and wrote to Governor Green, noting that, quote, states have exercised such authority for over 2 centuries. And the U.S. Supreme Court has affirmed this state authority repeatedly. And even skeptical legal voices acknowledge that there is something genuinely new here. University of Pennsylvania business law professor Jill Fish told The Atlantic that it's, quote, novel enough that it's hard to predict how a conservative court would react. She called it a great creative initiative. It's worth noting that one of my next guests, the state representative Souza, the one who asked so powerfully to whom this democracy belongs, is a Republican. I'm noting this because the bill passed the Hawaii State Senate 24-0. It passed the State House 50-1. The incredible bipartisan turnout is not surprising when you look at the polling. A new Politico poll found that 72% of Republicans and Democrats agree that there's too much money in politics. The Roberts Court may have given corporations this power, but the people never wanted them to have it, and Hawaii is not going to be alone for long. In Montana, a state with a century-old tradition of fighting corporate influence in politics, activists are gathering signatures right now to put the corporate power reset directly to voters this November. The Montana Supreme Court has already cleared the path, unanimously dismissing a legal challenge from a coalition of business groups that tried to block the initiative from even reaching the ballot. Meanwhile, legislation based on Moore's framework has been introduced this year in 14 other states, from California and New York to Georgia, Minnesota, and Vermont. Sponsors in Connecticut are planning to introduce similar legislation in 2027. If states as large as California and New York adopt this framework, the impact on American political financing would be, and this is not an overstatement, seismic. We're living through a moment when the concentration of wealth and power in American political life has reached levels that alarm most Americans, regardless of party affiliation. Citizens United played a central role in that, opening the floodgates for dark money, for anonymous corporate spending, for the kind of influence that makes ordinary voters feel correctly that their voices matter less. Hawaii just found a way to start addressing that, not by fighting the Supreme Court on its own turf, not by waiting for a constitutional amendment that may or may not come, but by reaching back 200 years into the bedrock of American law and using an authority that was always there. One that Tom Moore says simply went unused, untested, and unmentioned until now.